All right. Jeff. Oh, no, you're not Jeff.
No. Edit that out, please.
Greg.
It happens.
I knew, I was thinking all along, I was like, my eyes and my brain, they see Greg, but my mouth just wants to say Jeff.
I know,
right?
I know. All right.
Is that something that happens often to you, or
All the time.
Yeah, people confuse you.
As long as I've been alive.
But being confused for Jeff Kelley isn't such a bad thing, right?
No, that's the thing that people, does it bother you? I'm like, well, to a certain point, of course, I want people to call me Greg, but it's not as if like my dad was somebody who was terrible. That like people don't think of it like, oh, he's just like that Jeff guy who was my dad has a pretty good reputation in the West Island and in the liberal circles and even in the political circles just of Quebec.
Exactly.
So, anyways, but it does happen on occasion, especially since I have a lot of colleagues that worked with my dad. Well, I mean, I was fortunate. My previous job was working as a political advisor, right? So I started all the way back in 2010. I finished a master's in public administration, and the minister at the time of Indigenous Relations was Pierre Corbet. Mm-hmm. And they needed somebody in their office who I actually in school, not just because my dad was a minister, but it's a subject that I was very curious about. I studied a lot Canadian politics, American politics, and relations with Indigenous peoples was a subject that I just took a lot of courses on. So I had a knowledge of it, of course, through my dad, but also just an own personal interest in the relations between the Canadian Federation mostly and Indigenous people. So I got a job in Mr. Corbet because they needed somebody to kind of work with some of the communities who are a bit more English, and started out there. There was a cabinet shuffle. I went over to agriculture with Mr. Corbet, and then eventually I got a job with Yvon Valliere in Canadian relations. We lost under Mr. Charest, so I lost my job. Yeah. And then I came back in 2014. Mr. Fournier, Jean-Marc Fournier, offered me a job to go back to Canadian relations and help him work on some of his parliamentary leader duties and relations with the English-speaking community. Eventually led to a post working with the Premier of Quebec for relations with English-speaking Quebecers. That eventually led to the creation of a secretariat and the naming of a minister, Kathleen Wilde, who I worked with at the end. So a lot of the people I kind of knew through just being in Quebec City all the time, all those years. I was working in Quebec quite a bit. So I got to meet a lot of these different M&As when I was there. So but I never worked with them. It's one thing to see them kind of as a staffer, but then get put into the caucus and a different look, because now I am the son of, but I'm a colleague,
Yeah, exactly. Is it strange though to be around all these people that you were just, colleagues and staffers, and now suddenly you're the elected official?
Not in my eyes, no. Because I even viewed it when I was a staffer that we literally are a team. Like, I get it. Like the M&A, the minister and the premier, they have their posting, but we all have to work together. And I've always tried to be a person too that challenged and tested ideas. Like, I was never afraid to kind of speak up and say, well, it's kind of what I think. Yeah. I think that was somewhat appreciated, but there's of course some moments some people intimidate you just because, but I really always tried never to be that intimidated, but get out there and just work with everyone. I tried to do good as a team player, and I still see politics as a team sport. It's not just the caucus; it's important. It goes all the way down to our volunteers, to the people working in the riding offices, and to the people working in Quebec City. So for me, it was just like I'm just kind of going to another role, and of course it's different, but I always viewed it. They were all there to work for the same goal, same common goal.
It's funny because I don't ever remember seeing you, and of course, if you're saying that you worked mostly in Quebec City, it makes sense because I was mostly in Montreal. But we only got to know each other, last year during the campaign, and even then it was just a couple of, on a couple occasions. So I thought, okay, well, there's Jeff Kelley's kid, and he's coming in, and that's fantastic. I had no clue that there was all this background.
Yeah, and it's surprised that, like, again, when we go to those, conferences, the congrès and all that, there's a lot of us there, and I guess. I remember meeting you. I remember meeting you in the past at some of those events. But again, it was like in passing. Like, you and I had never actually sat down to have like a longer conversation. And part of that is literally just because you go to these events and you will see people. I haven't seen that person in a long time. You end up chit-chatting for a long time. You're with your riding association. I was always with Jacques-Cartier. So the things, they pass by. But it's... There is a story behind it. Like, of course, there's my dad, and people always say you have big shoes to fill, and I say that's true, but I also have my own shoes to kind of make. And yes, I'm 50% Jeff Kelley, but I'm also 50% Judy Harper, my mom. So I also bring in that side too. She I would say she's a little bit more feisty than my dad, and a little bit more, upfront and challenging things. So it really is a mix. But yeah, I mean, I never either viewed it as just because I'm Jeff Kelley's son, I was going to get the job, right? Like I never had that approach. I knew that I had to go out there and work there. And last year, to become the candidate, I got on the ground, I sold memberships. Yeah. I pushed hard for it because I wanted it. I wanted the job, and I wanted to represent my community. Jacques-Cartier and the West Island, I grew up there, and I truly believe that politics is a way to serve your community, and it is a public service. My grandparents were very involved in the community. My granny was involved in the formation of Alliance Quebec, the old defunct Anglo group. Mm-hmm. She worked really hard with the PQ government to make sure that there were rights for English-speaking Quebecers to access to health and social services. Yeah. She fought for that. Yeah. My granddad was an ultimate Liberal volunteer, and if there was a campaign going on, federal, provincial, municipal, school board,
he was there.
He was there. Mm-hmm. He was going to help the candidate. He, helped out Clifford Lincoln. Like, he was just one of those people. He spent so many years volunteering in politics. And on my mom's side, my granddaddy, he lived out in Vancouver. He was an Air Canada pilot, and he was very involved, with the Vietnamese boat people. So he helped a lot bring refugees to this country. Was very involved in his church, very involved in his community. Served Canada in World War II. So there is kind of in our family, our genes, there's a long history of the Kelleys and the other side, the Scots, that served in World War, served in community. So honestly, when people say it runs in the blood, it does. And it's not just me. My 4 sisters all work at public institutions.
Oh, wow.
So, it's just a little bit of a trait that we have. But we do really care about where we come from. We want to help our neighbors. And that's something that I keep carrying forward in politics and everything I do. I know where I come from. I know my roots. And I just want to always try and best represent those people.
How's your dad now? Is he involved at all? We were talking about this before going on air, how difficult that transition is, and obviously he was elected, I wasn't, but even as a staffer, just going to a more quote unquote normal lifestyle, it's just weird. I mean, is your father still watching the National Assembly channel, following? No,
he was happy to get rid of the part of sitting in the National Assembly, going to Quebec City. He had just had enough of that. He loved part of being the minister and working with Indigenous communities. He loved that part of the job. He loved being part of the larger discussions, but he, in all honesty, was just tired of making the trek to Quebec City, putting getting the suitcase out, putting clothing in it, going up to Quebec, and then coming back. My sister has 4 kids, so he kind of wanted to be closer to home, and he's really enjoying that part. But he's remained engaged. He's working right now at the school board issue for the English community as a volunteer. He's working at McGill part-time with their new public administration program. So my mom said to him, you can retire from politics, but you can't retire. You're not sitting around at home doing absolutely nothing. Yeah. So he's transitioned well, but I think he was kind of ready to leave the National Assembly life behind him. Yeah. And he didn't have because there are some people that continue to watch, question period, follow it a little bit. And not my dad, though. Not my dad.
It's a good thing, though, I guess, right? You did what you have to do, and then you just put everything behind you. You created that legacy, and he should be proud. I mean, his son is taking over, and the same writing, and I'm sure that he's proud of you. I can understand. He was there for a long time, though. When was he elected for the first time?
The first time he was elected was in 1994.
94.
Yeah. So he would have been brought in as after the Equality Party, if you remember in your Quebec history, when they swept the West Island ridings and took Westmount. He was the follow-up after that. He got elected. And so he would have been there for the last referendum in 1995. He would have lived through all that transition from a very heated campaign to how does Quebec fit itself into Canada after a referendum where the yes side lost. Mm-hmm. And he saw a lot. He really did. And he worked before that for Claude Ryan and as a political advisor himself. Mm-hmm. So he, in total, was about 30 years Quebec, Montreal.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Newly elected. Obviously, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's you're not a total stranger to politics or to the workings of government and parliament. But how does it feel?
Privileged is one word that always comes to mind. Yeah. When you sit in that desk in the National Assembly, it's extremely humbling. You realize not a lot of people have the opportunity to do that, and you have to you have to really respect it. And it's kind of sometimes why people get riled up in the National Assembly when an M&A might not behave properly, because I think there really is something to the institution that it deserves respect. It is the place of the people. It's not the place of just the people sitting there, right? So that was a big step. I think one of the biggest challenges is, and you watch it and you watch people and sometimes bosses go into parliamentary committees and study bills. That for me, I would say, has been the biggest challenge, is sitting in on those, remaining attentive, but also being sharp, because the days are long, and I'm being in the shoes of M&As now who have to sit there and like work on that stuff that can be quite technical, and you might not have any expertise in it.
Yeah.
You still have to contribute to the discussion. That's something that I think there is a learning curve, but you also have to find like your rhythm. Like, how are you going to be a good parliamentarian? How are you going to ask your questions? Some people can go into very specific details, or like grab a word and then run with it. So finding kind of like your rhythm, and also just, like I said, staying alert, because the days do get long. I'm also working in my second language. So that is sometimes where I've realized, wow, I appreciate now when I would watch ministers, when I was working as a staffer, you'd watch ministers going through these parliamentary committees, doing hundreds of hours studying a bill, and it's hours. That is where I think also to the population, well, what do you do? And you say, well, I sit in these committees, and they might not fully, grasp what are we doing there, because it's just one of those things that it doesn't get played on the news.
Yeah, of course.
And you're never shown that. But we sit there some days, from 10 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night with a few breaks, but studying, like one issue. And you'll do that for weeks at a time. And it's taxing, but it's also rewarding, because you end up then becoming an expert on a subject you might have known little about, or you had just seen kind of the larger principles about. So that is like one of the things I would say that out of everything that has changed, that not that I expected the least, but I definitely have a greater appreciation, is for the hard work that goes into parliamentary committees from everyone sitting around that table.
This is what I always found amazing. And like you said, it doesn't play on the news. Usually people get the 1 hour during question period where you're practically throwing things at each other. But people don't realize that the committee work that is being done, obviously there's members from all parties. In general, it's pretty humane, right? I mean, things get done almost on a unanimous level. There's a great deal of cooperation that happens in these committees, which is fantastic. The parliamentary system that we have, and people don't realize that, because very few people actually follow the committee work, right?
Yeah, good example to that. We just recently in Quebec City, they passed the taxi Uber bill.
Yeah.
So the modernization of the transport industry, or whatever the bill's official title was, Bill 17. And off the get-go, the government had not included adapted transportation for people with a handicap.
Yeah.
Was completely omitted from the bill. And the minister, obviously realized he had made a mistake, but was receptive to not just criticism, but like we brought amendments forward to try to make the bill better. We brought amendments forward on mobility and durable mobility. And there were things that he brought into his legislation that he accepted. And at the same time, we raised questions on a few issues that caught the government off guard, because, and it's not to blame the minister, he looks at some of these articles, and he might, the bill was 280 articles.
Yeah.
And he goes through it, but he might not have had the time on each and every one to
look at
grasp
the detail,
the kind of the larger perspective of how this could impact the industry. So like for example, was to limit the taxis industry's right to sue for a greater compensation. I don't know if they're going to win or not. That's going to be for a judge to decide.
Yeah.
But at least people should have the right to test that. And at one point, there was a clause that was in the bill that would have limited the right of taxi drivers to do that. And when we asked the minister, he was kind of, he didn't grasp it, and he rectified it later. But that's just a small example of us being an effective and efficient opposition. And we're not just blocking the way of the bill. We're studying it, and we're saying, hey, did you think about this? And him making the adjustments. So that is one thing, like you said, it doesn't get shown on the news. But bills in the end will be modified. Maybe not completely, but there will be changes made. And a lot of times it's due because the opposition asks the right and good questions. And the government's not always right. No bill arrives in the National Assembly perfect, ready to be adopted immediately.
Yeah. Let's go back to the election, 2018. Obviously, you've campaigned in the past. How did it feel for you to be the candidate?
So to be the candidate, again, you're extremely humbled to have that opportunity to go out there, represent a political party, go fight for what you believe in. What I think was really the most rewarding was that you have your platform, you're going out to spin, but then going out on the ground and talking to people, and it comes back with things you're like, wow, I never thought about that in my neck of the woods. And also just kind of also gauging what are the real priorities of people. And that's where I realized, the tough part of being kind of a staffer, especially if you're in Quebec City, you do get a little bit disconnected because you're not going out door to door. You're not going out to the mall to talk to people. You're not going out to train stations to meet with people. So it really gave me I realized that, being a grassroots politician, you don't just get elected and then go away. You have to do your best to try to remain as accessible as possible to people so they can come up to you and tell you how they're feeling. And then you'll be a more effective candidate. You'll be a more effective politician if you get there. So it was a huge lesson I learned. And it's something that I always remember my dad was saying, but not being the candidate. And when I would be a volunteer or whatever, I never, I think, fully appreciated until I was the ones there saying, okay, these people have huge expectations of me, and they're expecting me to go out there and work on certain things. So you owe it to them to try to do that to your best of the abilities. And a lot of the times you do have to just be frank with people and say, I don't have the response to you, but take my number and I'll try to get back to you. So that was a thing that I really took away from the campaign.
More in general though. I mean, it's amazing to see how people's ideologies just shift, right? Because I've been there since 2007. I didn't do the campaign in 2007, but right after the 2007, because it was a minority government, so we had an election in 2008, right? And I don't know about your riding, but specifically the one that I was in, things used to just change from one election to the next. I mean, the dynamics, and of course, we're smack in the middle of Montreal, so obviously there's all these demographic elements that we had to take into consideration. So obviously that's pretty much different from your riding, but things just changed enormously. And I realized that also in 2018, where you're going into the campaign with an exceptional track record, record numbers in employment, balancing budgets with surpluses, and you're thinking, what can happen? Everything's going to be fine. I mean, look what we're going into the campaign with, and you realize that people don't care. People don't care about platforms. People want to know what's going on the ground, and that's and there's a lot of grassroots movements now gaining a lot of momentum. We saw that obviously with Quebec Solidaire. They went from 2 M&As to how many are they now? 10?
Yep.
Just crazy.
Yeah, and increased in vote popularity. And there's no doubt, though, we governed for a long time. It's tough, like in the sense that everything that goes wrong definitely gets pinned on you.
Yeah.
And like you said, people don't necessarily notice the things that went right.
Yeah.
And you can cry out loud that we did so many good things, but people tend to remember kind of the latest thing and the worst experience. So how do you transform then from, and also getting stuck in the position that you become so defensive because it's your record and it's you were the minister and you were that, and then we get on our heels instead of kind of being out there. Quebec Solidaire has the freedom to be able to say whatever they want because, and at some point they might govern and might have to answer to people. Maybe that'll happen one day. But there is kind of getting in that opposition role. You can be very much more associated with movements. You can be very much more at liberty to say, I'm going to dip into people's RRSPs to fight climate change. But you can say things like that and people they won't remember that. But then when the day comes, if you're governing and you actually do it, that will
there's a certain accountability that you have to hold yourself to, but that's what I always found frustrating. It's like you're a party, that you're probably never going to govern, or maybe you are. Who knows? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But at that point in time, nobody knew. Nobody expects a party like Quebec Solidaire to govern. So you come out with all these crazy ideas, and they're populist ideas, right? I mean, they're very populist, and they attract a lot of popularity.
Yeah, and again, you hit the nail on the head there because people always think of populism as an exclusive to the right wing. It's not true. You can be a populist on the left. You can be a populist in the center. You can make the argument Bernie Sanders is a populist.
Yeah, of course.
Barack Obama was a populist in a lot of ways. So there will have to be a reflection within the party too that there used to be this big liberal machine that existed, and perhaps one point in our time it did. It's not there now. So how do you reconnect a little bit with the grassroots issues of people, but not how do you build those associations? How do you get people really involved in some of the things that we believe in? How do you rally people around individual freedoms and rights, which right now in the world seem to be something that people are willing to scale back on? I mean, there's a lot of these things that at the party we do have to think about reconnecting, and it's not just always, well, here's the platform, go with it, and people vote because of our record platform. No, but really getting people more involved and feeling that they can participate in the party, participate more in democracy. And it's a tough sell, but it is a huge part of the next phase of the party, the Liberal Party of Quebec, in my opinion.
Do you feel that there was a connection lost with the base?
You know, I think that there was a certain disconnect with some of our. I think people felt like they would go to our conventions and they would present ideas, get up to the mic and speak and say, okay, this is our platform, we're going to work on it, and this will be the next thing we do in the election. And then it never happens. Yeah. Some people are saying, well, why am I going to these things every weekend? Like, is anyone actually listening to me? And maybe that also has to be reflected how the party holds these conventions. You know, is it a place where we're going to say that we're always working specifically on building a platform together, or is it more a place that we get together and discuss ideas and do a little bit of networking with one another and try to build connections as liberals? I mean, I don't have all the answers, but perhaps it is just one of those things. What's happening in the United States? How are they holding their conventions? Like, what we do have to look around the world and say, hey, what has worked in other places, and can we adopt that here? But I think it's sometimes, if I was a volunteer, maybe I would have felt that it was harder to see, you know, some of the ministers. Do I really get a time to talk to them? I think it was a little bit difficult to do that for the party when they were in government for so long. There wasn't really a moment where we sat and looked at the party and rethought it top to bottom, which is an exercise which I'm happy to say is being done right now.
But I always felt, especially in the beginning when I started, there were propositions coming from all sorts of places. Yeah, like the associations were involved, and towards the end, at least until last year, that kind of I felt that was missing. Yeah, there was one or two committees that were proposing things. Of course, the youth wing has always been very present, which is a good thing. But I felt that too. I felt that you go there and you're like, okay, what exactly is being proposed here? Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen, honestly. I'm afraid, and I'll be honest with you. And this is actually something that Mr. Couillard told us at the end of the campaign. I'm afraid that we fall in a pattern where we follow, the populist trends just so we can succeed in support, rather than sticking to what identifies us and what makes our party. Yeah, that's what scares me the most. And I don't want to open this discussion. I guess I don't know if, depending on whether you want to talk about it or not, but the youth wing had proposed a constitution for Quebec, and they made some really, in my opinion, propositions that you wouldn't have expected, right? Yeah. And I was thinking, is that something that is needed right now, or are we doing this because it's the popular thing and that's how we're gonna get people back? This whole question on multiculturalism versus interculturalism. Because Legault won on the basis of the nationalist, and we have to chase that in order to get back our vote. It bothers me a little bit.
Yeah. I think that the party, there's nothing wrong with trying to not just dust off, but reinforce what being a liberal and a nationalist means, because I always felt that you could be a Quebec nationalist. Doesn't mean you have to be closed off to other cultures, to other languages. You build a nationalism that is inclusive and also one that conquers the world. Like being proud that Quebec, yes, we're a Francophone majority here with, different other linguistic groups and cultures, but we're all here to build Quebec together, and we're all equal. And we're also able to go out there. We don't have to be afraid of the world. We can go out there. We have companies that are dynamic, that can conquer markets. I always thought that was a brand of a nationalism that I could accept, and not one that says that there's a majority against everyone else, which is the nationalism that is pushed right now. Union nationale. I mean, that is what it is. So if you want to talk about building a constitution, I'll be there for the discussion. But don't expect me to accept something that is CAC light, you know? If you want to build a constitution that reinforces rights of all Quebecers in all aspects, you'll have my voice will be part of that. I will be there for the discussion. I'll be there to stand up for an inclusive Quebec, one that is thinking of the future of all of us together moving forward. Do I think that we need a constitution tomorrow? No. Honestly, I think we have a constitution with the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms that exists. There is a Charter of Language too. I mean, if you look at that, that would be considered in many ways constitutions. Do we need to have something that is a little bit more definitive about what divisions of power Quebec has? Like, I don't know. So I would have to have a more thorough discussion with people on why we need a constitution. Why does it have to be done right away? I don't close the door to it. But I think if we want to reconnect with all Quebecers, because I don't like it just has to be about francophones. You can't have the obsession just exclusively with that, because Anglophones and Allophones didn't go out and vote for the Liberal Party last time either. We have a challenge to reconnect with Quebecers in all the corners of this province. I still think that in the end of the day, it comes down to, we want a good healthcare system, we want good social services, we want a strong economy, we want a good education system, we want to fight climate change. And I know that those are all things that people are competing for, but that has always been our bread and butter and what has united people from different backgrounds, different ideologies to the Liberal Party, and one that always presented big ideas. I still admire the Plan Nord because it was a dream. It sold a plan to Quebecers of a very ambitious project. That's what, in my opinion, draws people in together. So I'm not saying that's what has to be the next time around, but if you're trying to bring in a lot of people back into the fold, I don't think it has to pass exclusively by passing constitutions. I think people are more concerned with the bread and butter issues.
I agree with you 100%. And the fear that I have is that because we seem to be drifting more on the lines of ideology, I'm just afraid that we're going to lose people.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I think the disconnect is going to become even bigger.
Yeah. And again, I get that point. Like when you see the polls with the Francophone numbers, I totally understand. And I also just look at the polls, period. And I say, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. But again, it was always a party, and it always is. The Liberal Party remains one of big tent politics. You have to stay that way. And you have to be able to bring in people who have a more left-wing ideology, people who have a more right-wing ideology, people who are in the center, people who are attracted to specific causes. How can we get some of the bigger thinkers in this province coming back to our conventions, coming to participate in our discussions? For me, that's kind of what I'm hoping for the renewal of the party and the way forward. And I think we can get there. I still see that there are a lot of very interesting and bright minds that are involved with the party, and they want to do more. So that's how I'm feeling right now. But I hear what you're saying. I really do. And we can't just assume because we're liberals and if we try to act a little bit more nationalist, we'll be right back in there, because I think that's not the pathway to success.
The other thing that shocked me a little bit, and of course, at some point, there's democracy in a party, right? There's a decision-making process. I'm not so sure it was the right decision to launch a leadership race that soon after the elections. Yeah. I think it was a big mistake, and it happened. I mean, the people, they decided. I just don't know if we were ready for it, right? I mean, even on a strategic level, you're launching into a leadership campaign at the exact same time when the government is in its honeymoon period, right? Yep. Aside from the fact that you're already low in the polls, how are you going to get that excitement back into the party and into this whole process, right? And it sucks because until now, there's only one person that has officially declared that she's a candidate. I think she's great. I have nothing against Dominique. I think she's great, but I just would have loved to have like maybe 3 or 4 different people just to exchange these ideas, bring people closer to the party, and it's just not happening. Yeah.
And I had 2 thoughts on that. I was in your line of thinking, I went to my association after, said, I think we should probably try to buy ourselves as much time as we possibly can. Let the next leader take over and not, let somebody do a lot of the legwork to, kick-start the party, reorganize it. But my association, a lot of people say, no, we think it's good to have a leader sooner rather than later. In the end of the day, a lot of the militants thought the same way, and totally accept that. And so you got to move on from that. But I hear what you're saying on that point too, that perhaps a little bit more time would have been beneficial. That was my line of thinking. But I do also see that at some point people are also waiting on a leader. I mean, Pierre Arcan is doing a great job, but they know he has the interim tag.
Yeah.
So people, I think, also want the next leader to really be hands-on in reforming this party and getting to work right away on rebuilding things. So I see the advantage of...
But we have 4 years, man. Like, I don't know. I don't know. The way I see it is, let the interim leader do the 2 years, create the cohesiveness in the party, perform well in opposition, pressure the government, gain some momentum, and then bring in your leader towards the end when we're approaching the elections, because you don't want the leader to come in soon now and have to trip or have to overcome all these stumbling blocks until you reach the election. You have no idea what might happen until 2022, right? So it's always better, I think, bring in the leader when the party is somewhat on the rise, and then everyone gets behind the leader, and we continue on that momentum. I think that you bring the leader in sooner, there may be a stumbling block, and we may be left in opposition for another 4 years.
No, and for sure. I mean, one way or the other, is there potentially another scenario where it comes later and it would have worked out well? Perhaps. But like you said, now that next person coming in is going to have a good period of about 3.5 years, 3 years, 2.5 years to set their mark, and going to have to obviously manage some rocky waters. There's no doubt about it. But the plan also has to be that the person comes in and then really implement something that is a concrete strategy to get to 2022. We can't just assume because we're liberals, and this is the old adage about liberals who end up being too arrogant, is that, we'll just go next time and win because we're liberals. I mean, it's good on one hand that people think we can always win. That helps keep your brand alive, but you also can't have this plan that you just think it's going to happen. So if somebody wants to come in and is serious about the job, is well organized, and is going to lay out a game plan, reorganize the party, re-engage our militants, prepare us for 2022, because it's going to have to happen almost right away that the machine starts getting to work.
Yeah.
It is, of course, a big task, but I can see also on the flip side the advantage of leaving the leader to really put their mark on everything. And it's something the party never really had. Mr. Couillard won, and then within...
It was instant.
It was like instant he had to go to the
Well,
camp.
because we were in a minority government too, right? So
that was the circumstances of the moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, now the fact that we have 4 years, I mean, it just seems that it's still so far away.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying, with certain people at the party taking parts of the electorate for granted. We're like, it's okay, we're liberals. We're we're going to get together. We're going to come out to vote. I noticed that the younger generations now that are coming into that voting age, regardless of what their parents are voting, they're not there.
Yep.
You have to go get them. It's like this renewal that we have to engage in. I remember in 2018, the campaign, for some reason, they had to come out with an internal poll where they told us the youngsters, like the 18 to 35 demographic is liberal. And I was looking at them and I was like, where?
Yeah.
I'm like, come and walk in my riding. I mean, I'm not sure those youngsters are liberal, I mean...
Or voting.
Or voting, yeah. Well, now they seem to be a little bit more engaged. The social media, I mean, they're present. They're much more aware of the different causes. Like, for example, the environment. We had a march in Montreal a couple of weeks ago. It was just enormous, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of young people engaged. I think the engagement isn't so much the problem. I think it's reaching them on an ideological level to tell them that, listen, this is what we're proposing. Where do you stand on these issues, right? And not to necessarily take that for granted.
Yep.
There's a federal election. I mean, I'm not sure when we're going to post this episode, but just for the people listening or watching, we're a couple of days before the federal election, and I was talking with an organizer, because we're doing the car ride conversation, so I'm interviewing a bunch of candidates, and there was this organizer that I was talking to, and we're not going to say the riding, but he was, they were campaigning specifically with an ethnic group. And I was telling him, like, are you sure that's the best strategy? Yeah, don't worry, they usually vote for us, or we're just making sure that they come out. I'm like, okay, yeah, you have to make sure that they come out, but I'm not so sure that the younger generations, because their parents were voting whatever party, that they're necessarily yours, right? And it's just this, I don't know what it is. It's a bug that we have, especially when it comes down to strategy and when we're organizing a campaign, where by default you just grab chunks of your electorate. Okay, these are with us, just to figure out where your numbers are, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah. And Quebec has more recently really been a a swing province since Jack Layton.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, like we've seen waves in Quebec that we haven't really seen in other provinces. Like just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a bunch of people marched to the polls and voted in a way that all the political analysts said, no, you know, it's going to go even for Justin Trudeau. I mean, it was I was surprised by how many seats he won last time. And I said, wow, man, Quebec in some of these areas.
Well, he was coming in third, right?
Yeah, he was coming in third.
Until about a week or so.
And a week before. and he basically won on the coattails of Quebec, honestly. And of course, Ontario helped out big, but it was surprising. And even with the CAQ. I mean, the CAQ went into the last campaign rising and into second, but in very close competition with the PQ. Mm-hmm. PQ, basically all their voters went to the CAQ, and some of our Liberal voters went there. But that was also, even the last 2 weeks, there was for sure a movement of a lot of people who are undecided voters, or voters who are just, you know, I usually vote Liberal, but this time I'm voting CAQ. Or, you know, and like that loyalty
there
was
a
gone.
There was a lot of
loyalty was gone. And I think Quebec voters right now, fickle is a good word to use. But like you said, you can't just count on people because they voted for you last time to go vote just because I'm just going to go vote red again. I'm going to go vote blue again. Yeah. And how do you break down that barrier? That is I think a huge challenge. We see that in politics across North America right now. How do we talk to kind of the middle class, younger voter, young families right now, and what are the ways that they're consuming the media?
45.
Yeah. They don't consume the media. They don't consume politics like the previous generations, and a lot of the practices to get people to vote are based more on practices from older systems. So it's a really good question. I've yet to crack that one. Besides the fact, I still think at least retail politics of going out into your community to see as many people as you can remains, at least so you can meet them, you know, and they'll know your face. I think people still appreciate that.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit. You were on the radio yesterday, I think. With Catherine Fournier, former member of the Parti Québécois, now turned independent. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that. I find that very interesting. What are you guys working on?
We have in Quebec City, there is actually a Circle of Young Parliamentarians. It was created in the last legislature by the group of 3 MNAs who were under 35. So they said, look, we don't have a lot of people right now, but in the future, because there's a circle of there's a circle of female parliamentarians. There's a circle that works on questions just like IT at the National Assembly. So somebody said, well, it'd be good to have a youth one, and maybe one day it will become a little bit more interesting in the sense that there's more people. So this time around, there's 14 people under 35. Wow. So we can get together, talk about issues, but it's also to show a little bit that young people can be involved in politics. We can be elected. Like, it's not just always negative. And George, I've been pretty disappointed by the federal elections tone. Not by the local people necessarily. Like my MP, he's a really nice guy. He doesn't play that style of politics. But if I look up at the national campaign,
it's dirty.
It's just dirty. But it's also, and I made this point yesterday on CGD. If I'm 18 years old, I'm going to vote for the first time, and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to pay attention. I'm like, wow, I'm never voting again. You know, but it's frustrating.
Yeah, no, but it's funny that you mentioned it because it's a topic that has come up on many episodes of the Car Ride show. There's very little content, and but it set the pace, right?
Yeah.
As soon as the election started, Andrew Scheer came out, even before Justin Trudeau came out to announce the elections. He stole the thunder basically, and he set the pace, he set the tone, he came out swinging, and I was like, oh my God, is this going to be the campaign?
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's why yesterday I went on with Catherine Fournier, who we're from 2 different walks of life. There's no doubt about it. And she wrote a book, and I read it, and there's some ideas there, and I read, I'm like, I now understand a little bit where she comes from. There's some things in there that there's commonalities between us. And I just wanted to go on air and show that, her and I can sit down in a room, talk, have a respectful conversation. We can debate ideas, but also that she truly kind of believes that politics have to change and positivity has to be. You have to always be presenting ideas and getting people around ideas, bring people into politics for good reasons, not just, and I know that in a debate, I don't blame them. You have a short 2-minute span to respond to questions that are extremely technical. How are you going to fight climate change? You have a minute 30. What do you want in a minute 30? Me to explain how I'm going to do that? I think it's extremely unfair. But you do know in that 1 minute 30, I can get that clip that will become a GIF, that will become a meme, that will become something quotable in the paper. And if I have a minute 30, maybe it's easier just to go negative, because that will be something that people will retain. And that's not just politicians' fault. There's a lot of the media side too, that they kind of want this conflict and to sell controversy. I mean, for how many weeks do we talk about friggin' blackface for 2 weeks straight? I'm like, at a certain point, what more can we talk about this? And I think if I feel that way, that means I'm sure
definitely.
a lot of people are saying, okay, we get it. We don't agree with what he did, but he said sorry. And okay, a few more cases, let's move on. So I think that that's kind of why we're just going out there to remind people there can be positive elements in politics. And you know, that doesn't mean that you can't be a critic and you keep the government accountable, because if not, we'll be North Korea. You do have to do that part where you criticize the government, but the personal bashing and the personal attacks, I felt it's been a very American-style campaign, and it frustrates me, and it worries me too.
Tell me a little bit about the caucus there. I mean, you know, you're collaborating with Catherine Fournier. Obviously, you're sitting in this committee together. You want to bring forth change. You have different ideas. How does that resonate in caucus?
So the caucus, one thing that's good, at least for us as a young group, it's one way for us to sit down. People come from all parts of Quebec. We have members of Quebec Solidaire, the CAQ, Parti Québécois. So just basics, we get to know one another. And then sometimes that can help in committee when you're like, hey, let's go maybe together bring this idea to talk to the minister about. You know, when you don't go alone, that can kind of help you out. But also just how is the National Assembly, are we doing enough getting out into our schools? Are we doing enough getting out into CEGEPs in a non-partisan way to say, like, here's what government's about. Here's what politics is all about. You don't always have to see it as a constant conflict. It's a place where ideas can be shared. So I think in a lot of times we're just trying to talk about how we can make the National Assembly look a little bit younger, because it is obviously a lot older people that are there. Politics is a tough job for somebody who has a young family. It's not ideal working hours. You're far away from your family, especially if you come from certain regions of Quebec. So a lot of times it's trying to discuss too, is there ways that we could maybe modify the schedule? Can we bring voting in the National Assembly? Can it be done electronically? I mean, there's some of those things that can we bring the National Assembly into a more modern age? How can we try to find ways to make things less partisan? So we have kind of like group discussions about that, and any decisions that we do make will just be proposed to the National Assembly. It's then up to the president to decide if he wants to take on what we're proposing. But sometimes it's just modern, you know, if somebody brings a child to the National Assembly, could they have their baby with them sitting in the National Assembly if the baby's being respectful and quiet? Like, no, those are things that the National Assembly's never spoken on. So we want to kind of be a little bit more preventive, just to say, is there a quiet room next door that could perhaps be made accessible if somebody's kid can't go to daycare and they want to be at a vote? I mean, just small things like that are, again, trying to make the National Assembly a little bit of a more conducive place for younger people to get involved and stay in politics. Because you do see a lot of younger people, they'll leave. And not because they don't want to run or they can't win again. They just say, it's tough. It's too tough for my family life. It's not the right point. And that's why in the end, we have a lot of people in the National Assembly are towards the end of their careers, and they enter in as almost the last thing they're going to do. So if we want to have a National Assembly that's a little bit more reflective of our society and of younger people, the National Assembly might have to rethink some of its practices. It's not to say we have to work less, but maybe how are we working and can be more efficient.
Dude, I know you have to get on a call.
Yeah, I got to get on a call. This is a lot of fun, though.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
we should do it again.
Yeah, no, I mean, never. I'm happy to come back. Maybe we can do a debrief of the session. Just go over for your listeners some of the things we talked about in the National Assembly, because that goes by so fast.
Yeah, man,
too.
for sure. I appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks a lot.